And good morning, everybody. We're live. Congratulations. You made it through this holiday week. Another week of fantastic food safety, awesome products, putting food on the table of people and enjoying it and having a great time. And part of working in food safety, we all know this, is that it's really challenging because even if you do a good job, nobody notices because things are working smooth. But guess what? Today, myself and Bill are going to let you know that we really appreciate you and say thanks. We appreciate all that you do to keep our food safe. If you're new to the chat, my name is Brian Armentrout. I'm with the Food Leadership Group. And every week at this time on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter, 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 7 a.m. on the Pacific Coast, where Bill is, we have an hour conversation on a food safety topic. And what you'll notice with this is that we're not lecturing. We're not providing a bunch of slides and going through a presentation. This is meant to be a discussion. And when you're having a discussion like this, there's not many better people to have on than our guest today, which is Bill Marler, the managing partner at Marler Clark Law Firm. How are you doing today, sir?
Good morning. Good morning. Happy day after 4th of July.
So. Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting holiday. We have a young Yorkshire Terrier. He's about 2 years old now, and you're never quite sure how they're going to react to the fireworks. But he was cool. So that was good. No freakouts from the dog.
Yeah. They've banned fireworks on the island I live on, and for gosh knows how many reasons. But of course, that just encourages people, more. And so, fireworks went off till about 3:00 this morning, all over the island. It was actually just opening up my door, the windows, and you could watch the fireworks displays from people all over the island. So.
Wow. Yeah. Here in Colorado, they had a bunch of big announcements with different counties here saying, hey, you better not do this because it's illegal here as well. Don't launch fireworks. We have drones. We have drones in the police department. We're going to be watching for fireworks. And I'm just like, well, that just sounds like sending up targets to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fires happen. So obviously Colorado, that. So it's good to see you again. Good to see you again. So are you going to IAFP?
No, I wish I was. You going to be there?
I think so. Well, I'm speaking, so I guess I have to go. So, but so.
Cool. I'm sorry, I'm missing that. Alexis, good morning in North Carolina. And so please, everybody, let us know that you're here in the chat. Let us know where you're at. Say hello and all that's good things. Oh, also, by the way, don't forget, one of the things that Bill was involved in quite a bit is the Poison documentary on Netflix. So if you haven't seen that, make sure and check that out. Really, really good to watch that and get his thoughts around food safety and different industry experts as well. So with that, we have a ton, guys, to cover here today. So we're going to start off here with a ceremonial drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers.
Cheers.
Fantastic. Duncan, good morning, sir. Well, I would say that, but Duncan's over on the other side of the pond, so it's afternoon for him. So we're going to dive in here. So with that, in food safety, there's lots of activity, and we generally tend to focus around the microbiological threats associated with food. Chemistry kind of gets, with allergens, and we pay attention to that, and foreign material always kind of seems like a Me Too thing that's always in the top 3 for recalls. But with the whole issue with the daily harvest and the recall on that, you are highly involved in that. And one of the things, Bill, that I think that we don't do a very good job of in the food industry is postmortems. And when a big event happens, going back and saying, holy crap, what went wrong? Why did this happen? And I know from personal experience, when you have a recall, the first thing the company wants to do is get through it. And then once it's over, everybody in the company is like, oh my God, let's move on. And we never want to go through that again. The postmortems can be super important. And your work involved with the Terra flour and daily harvest and all these type of issues definitely deserves that. And I think there's some really good cautionary tales in here. So we're gonna have a really good show here today. So first off, to get everybody kind of up to speed on this, what the heck are we talking about here, Bull? What is this issue with this Terra flour stuff?
Yeah, I think it is. It's as you stated, for 30 plus years, I've been sort of in the, doing bacteria, E. coli, salmonella and stuff. And so this case was really unusual, but essentially what happened was they have a daily harvest, which is at the time, maybe less so now, but it was a very, very successful direct from a producer to consumer direct mail food system, vegan, healthful, that whole marketing thing. And at some point in late 2021, they were approached by one of their longtime suppliers of ingredients with this, what they called this brand new superfood, and called Terra protein flour. And they were approached by them within days of being pitched by the manufacturer of Terra. And so they turned around and started pitching it directly to Daily Harvest and other companies. Daily Harvest took the bait and started mixing this in with a new formula, French leek and lentil crumbles. And they went on the market, and right away, people started showing up in ERs all over the country with essentially acute liver failure. And about 450 to 500 adverse events. Most looked a lot like if people were developing hepatitis A, the same elevated liver enzymes, all the things that you would expect. But they weren't testing positive for hepatitis A. They weren't testing positive for anything except for elevated liver enzymes. There were about 50 people that had their gallbladders removed. And so, we're talking, across 500 people, tens of millions of dollars in medical expenses. And so I got involved because people were calling and like, what is this? What's going on? And then I uncovered that there was another company from Canada that was using Terra protein flour in smoothies. And they had another cluster of cases, less illnesses, but still, people with liver failure and gallbladder removals. And through discovery, through the process of litigation, we figured out that the manufacturer of the Terra from Canada was also the same manufacturer for the Daily Harvest. So it all kind of came together. But again, we also didn't know what is in it. And to be honest with you, still to this day are not quite clear what what it is in the Terra that has made 500 people sick. There's been some more recent studies. I think there's no question that people believe that, under the epidemiological facts, that Terra was the cause of the illness. And there's some interesting research being done. Mississippi State, their labs are doing some interesting research on what might be, and they're kind of focused on a protein that may impact some people, but not all people. And so it's a really fascinating thing, but it left, a lot of people quite ill. Daily Harvest lost half of its employees, half of its sales. And then the litigation's been going on for, over 2 years.
Oof. So the cases are still out there?
They're still out there. I think some parts of this are going to get resolved. But, there's more disputes between the defendants as to who's more responsible for, this problem than someone else. So there's a lot of, typical finger pointing. And, but there's been some clarity, the clarity coming from the Canadian Food Safety Agency, where they said that Terra was a novel food ingredient, and because it had never been approved by the Canadian government, was not to be sold or utilized in Canada. And then a few months later, our own FDA essentially came out with the same thing. They have slightly different rules, but simply said that it was not grass, generally recognized as safe. It was not approved by the FDA. And so the FDA considered Terra protein flour as an adulterant. And so an illegal substance that should not have been imported to the U.S. and should never have gone into manufactured goods. So, and under our, both the Foreign Supplier Verification Program, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, all the new aspects of FSMA, that responsibility for making sure adulterated products don't get into food is a shared responsibility from the importer, the manufacturer, and all of these entities essentially blew it off.
Yeah. Ugh. And it's just, I mean, there's so many different directions here. So we're going to kind of talk about this, and then we're going to get into the regulatory side of things as well. And, kind of my thoughts around who should be the main, at least from my side, from looking at it from a food safety standpoint, who should be the person who has the most responsibility. And that's the company that's looking at bringing this in.
Right.
But it sounds like, Bill, that we were just really lucky because there happened to be these two outbreaks associated with this, and they only had one common ingredient. So it's like, oh, well, it must be this. I can only imagine how long this would have gone on if that wasn't the case.
Exactly. No. And it was very sort of fortuitous. In fact, I remember getting a call. It was July 2nd, 2022. So just a little over 2 years ago. I remember getting a call. It was a Saturday, I think, and Saturday or Sunday. I can't remember which day the 4th fell on that year. But it was from a woman who was explaining her symptoms. And I'm like, oh, it sounds like you're a person linked to Daily Harvest. She goes, no, I drank, revived smoothies from Canada. And I'm like, well, that's weird. So then I went online, and lo and behold, the common ingredient was Terra flour. I didn't know at that time whether or not the Terra flour came from the exact same company, but it eventually through litigation traced back, which happens a lot. There's many times where we hear about foodborne illness outbreaks, whether it's E. coli in lettuce or whatever. You kind of get a 35,000-foot view when the FDA comes in and says it all came from Yuma. But one of the things that I get to do as a lawyer is I get to put people under oath. I get to subpoena records, and I can recreate a trace back. And many times, I get right down to, what row the romaine lettuce was grown in.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good that we have the ability to do that now. It's at least those systems are getting better for that traceback piece of it. Yep. Completely separate topic, but it's going to be interesting with the enhanced traceability rule and all of that going on. And we'll kind of talk about that here a little bit. Larry, happy 4th to you as well. Hey, Tim, good to see you as well. It's good that Tim's back home. That guy's always traveling. So originally, as I understand it too, Bill, this Terra flour stuff was originally used as a gum or things like this as well, right? It wasn't even
so Terra gum. It comes from the same plant. It's just used in different ways. Terra gum is grass. It's recognized. It's been in use for a long time. But Terra protein flour is a different derivative of the same plant. But it had never been used, much in the U.S. We have uncovered some instances where companies, in fact, a company in Colorado, were using it to add to like protein powder or protein candies and crackers and things. But there was a very small amount. And whether or not people got sick is hard to know. But it had never been used before, widely across the world. And it was just one of those sort of things where, I think the marketing side of the importer got excited because it had, a profile of high amino acids and had high protein, and they saw it as they said, quote unquote, a new superfood. And so I think they got so excited about the marketing possibilities that the food safety side of it, got lost.
Yeah. Well, we were talking here a little bit before we went live around the communication that came from this company and the video that you saw around that. That was pretty cool. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we were during the course of the litigation, we asked for all kinds of records. And one of the things we fought about for a while was getting the Zoom video of the initial sales pitch from the Terra manufacturer to the importer, Smirks in Colorado. And it was, all the sales guys on the call, all excited about the superfood stuff. Not one question about, is it grass? Has it been approved? Is it safe? Blah, blah, blah. It was all about protein, 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 and who they could market it to. And so, it for me, because this is not a space that I've played in where it's about, FDA regulations in this kind of detailed way of grass and pre-approval and novel food ingredients. You kind of wonder how often something like this happens. And, companies, who are trying to outmaneuver their competitors or, get a leg up or, honestly try to bring a positive product to the marketplace, get overly excited about the product without paying attention to, some of the details, which is, is it generally recognized as safe? And if the answer is no, well, maybe you need to take a hard look at, whether or not it is safe or not. And so I think those are the kinds of things that I've come away from this wondering, frankly, are we seeing, the tip of the tip of the tip of the iceberg, given all the products that are out there and all the desire to market more healthful foods and, the pressures on companies to, keep ahead of their competitors. And I just think to myself, it's like, this is a cautionary tale. And this is going to cost these companies, tens of millions of dollars. And, and then who knows what, the FDA is going to do. I mean, importing an illegal adulterated product is a crime. Yeah. It's a crime. It's at least a misdemeanor under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is punishable by up to a year in jail and a $250,000 fine. And, there's no indication that there's, knowingly put this product into the market like our, infamous friends at Peanut Corporation of America. But still in all, I mean, these companies, not only are at risk to compensate the victims for what they went through, but I think, they need to take a deep breath and wonder when, the Justice Department might knock on their door.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like Felix says here is, this is clearly a case of rushing a novel ingredient. Absolutely. And a couple of key points here is what we're really seeing this, and this is why I like this case from this standpoint. This is a perfect example of the overlap of marketing and food safety, and how these two groups have to interact within your company. And this is something, Bill, that I talk about quite a bit here on the chat is in quality, we're technical people and we like, playing with our analytical stuff and doing it. Once you are head of quality in a company, that's important that you understand those things, but that's not your main role. Your main role is to be promoting and making sure that the other groups in the company understand what the standards are that are associated with this, so that if something does happen, the ideal situation is the marketing people get hit with a promotional video from a company for a novel ingredient. They just don't start rushing headlong into it. They come and talk to me, or at least think to themselves, I wonder what Brian's going to think about this, and get that conversation going. And if you're not doing that in your company, that's a gigantic mistake, because under foreign supplier verification, to your point, that's a nice easy trail for FDA. It's like, okay, importer goes to importer of record, goes to the company. Who's the food safety person responsible? Who's that PCQI who's doing those reviews? They're coming right to you. They're not going to go talk to the marketing people. They're going to talk to the food safety people.
No, it's you're absolutely right. And it was clear that food safety was brought into this very late in the game, also the food safety, professional there, relied on, documents, that came from the manufacturer that, they should never have relied on. And then I think anybody, competent wouldn't have. For example, instead of a grass statement, they got a food grade statement, which was a one-liner with a statute that comes from the EU that has nothing to do with food. And so, there were some really basic things that it was, you could kind of tell that it was just like turning a blind eye to, the risk. And again, they were absolutely adept at like paying attention to pathogens. They had, their certificates of analysis and all that. They were totally up on that. But what they weren't paying attention to is it's a brand new food item. Has it ever been utilized in the US and utilized in a way that it's already gotten GRAS status? Because you can self-authenticate GRAS. You can do that, but you have to have a basis for it. There needs to be peer-reviewed studies and all of that. But, a quick internet search would have told you there was nothing out there that had anything to do with, Terra powder. And it was just like, hey, we got this new superfood. Let's market it.
I hate that word, superfood.
Yeah.
What the hell is a superfood? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just a marketing term.
I asked that question. I asked that question under oath, and it was essentially their definition was a high protein food, and I'm like, okay, whatever. So, but anyway, it's
so steak superfood, I guess. That steak behind you, and your graphic.
Yes.
And really, the other kind of factor that we need to take in consideration here as well, and Alexis has a very interesting question here for you that I'll ask you here in a second, is the other mitigating factor we need to be really worried about in food safety in our current market is the inflationary period that we're in. So food companies are trying to protect their margin. The R&D guys are working like crazy, saying, "Oh my God, this one ingredient that we're using is super expensive. I need to find an alternate." So now the R&D group is also trying to find new ways to formulate products to get the same functionality with keeping the cost the same or lower. And that puts tremendous pressure on the food safety systems as well.
Certainly. Yeah, no, I absolutely, I mean, I don't view this whole thing in a vacuum. I understand, the pressures that are on companies, I mean, I must, I'm a small business person too. I have costs and overhead and all those things that come into play to, when I do what I do, and and I have to make choices, and I have to, just make decisions about, cutting here or cutting there, or adding here or adding there, and is that a good deal or not? I get it, and but we have rules. Lawyers, we have rules, and the rules is, you can't like take money from your client's trust account. You can't lie to a judge. There's rules that we have. And, and for food safety in this situation, the rule was, you can't use an ingredient. You can't import an ingredient that has not got GRAS status or been approved by the FDA. And they could have done that. I mean, It's not like they couldn't have. They could have sought pre-approval from the FDA. It's a free thing that the FDA would have done for them. They could have, stepped back and, gone to a university and said, is this product safe? Let's do some testing. But they didn't do that either. And so, and because of it, I think it's important too, and probably all your audience is, well aware of this, but, the term adulterant, when we think about, E. coli on romaine lettuce, clearly that romaine lettuce is adulterated by an adulterant, E. coli. But the way the FDA looks at adulterant too is that it's not just E. coli on romaine lettuce. It's when an ingredient doesn't have a status that has determined that the product is safe or approved by the FDA, that makes that ingredient an adulterant. And when it goes into a food product, that's an adulterated food product, period. And so, it's one of those things.
Yeah. And we always circle back to that. And that's a good point. With FDA, it always comes back to their legal authority, and that's adulteration and misbranding. Those are the two key things. And on that note, Alexis here asked a really good question. Want to get your opinion on. Is how do you think the new Supreme Court decision around Chevron is going to affect this?
Oh,
Everybody's talking about this. Everybody's talking
yeah.
about this.
I don't think. Well, I've been paying a lot of attention to to Chevron, and I've been paying a lot of attention to this. I don't think in this particular situation, Chevron or the overturning of Chevron applies. This is not really something that it's the FDA using their discretion to make a decision. It's clear that a product that it's in the statute. It's clear that the product that is not GRAS, not been approved, is an adulterant, and so I don't think it would have impacted here at all. It's more of a problem for FDA when it or FDA or USDA. It's more of a problem when they're interpreting a vague rule or statute. I'll give you an example, like the water rule. My view is that that you have a situation where our Congress says, we want to make sure that these things are done. You need to pay attention to traceability. You need to pay attention to, water. You need to pay attention to this. But they don't go into the detail of this is what the water system's got to be, and this is how much you can have of coliforms. This is, blah, 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 blah. They don't do that. They rely on the experts at the FDA to, make those decisions in their rulemaking. That's where Chevron creates, the anti-Chevron creates a real problem for, regulators, because essentially what the court says is that judges are better at making that decision than regulators, which is, I guess, if you have the egos the size of Supreme Court judges, that makes sense. But to most of us in the space, that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My takeaway from all this is, so FDA has got, under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, a real clear directive on what they're supposed to be doing. And then the regulations are written. You can trace all of their processes back through this. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out for, regulatory agencies that overstep that. So, for example, let's say the EPA says, all right, no one's allowed to have gas burning stoves in their homes as of 2030. Really? Where does that trace back, right? And asking these agencies, where did you get the authority to have that applied to the American public? Things like that.
Well, there was an op-ed in Food Safety News, I think it was over the weekend, by Tom Gramillion. And like, would under this rule, would deeming E. coli 0157 an adulterant in hamburger hold up under a post Chevron world? I think we're not at risk of going back, but I think that it would have been highly likely that the beef industry, under the rules that exist presently now with overturning Chevron, I think that the beef industry would have been in a much, much stronger position to attack the decision made by, Mike Taylor and the USDA and FSIS in 1994. I think we may be if that had happened, if Chevron didn't exist, we may well have seen a situation where E. coli was still completely allowed in ground beef today. So and it cuts other ways too. I mean, consumer groups, when FDA makes a decision and the consumer groups don't like, and it's not, arguably, and again, all of this is gray, it's like, do they have the authority? Do they not have the authority? Does the statute really say what it says? Hey, you got a lawyer on your show. I can find, a change in anything you want. And it's the reality is that I think it's, do government entities overstep their bounds? You bet. Do government entities sit on their hands and do nothing forever? Yes, they do that too. And so, I think that putting courts in charge of determining and deciding whether or not the FDA or FSIS should be deferred to, or other agencies to be deferred to. Judges don't have any more insight into science than anyone else. But the scientists at these entities have a lot of background in science, and so I think you have to. I think I'm concerned about it. And the last thing I would say is, one of the things that concerns me a lot is that the government entities are very risk averse, and so my fear too is that they're going to say, well, we can't make that decision, even though it's it's for the public good and for food safety or for public safety. We're not going to make that decision because we're going to get sued. And and the industries, whatever industry it is, they've got big law firms behind them. I mean, I'm in the Terra case. I've got 4 defendants. Each one of those law firms have well over 1,000 lawyers each. So it's like, the government isn't as big as you think it is when it comes to litigation capacity. So,
very interesting. Good question, Alexis. Thank you very much. I know it's all on all of our minds. I think, back onto our topic here is that, and Felix said this as well here, is that the primary responsibility for this food safety still remains as it is, right? This doesn't change any from that standpoint.
No, correct.
But, and the big thing with me is always when you're evaluating, especially new novel ingredients, new quote unquote superfoods, these type of things, we all, as quality people, we say, give us the documentation. We get the documentation, and I think we have a flaw in our system with this bill, is people trust what's in writing. And so they'll look at it and say, oh, wow, here's a COA. This must be this must be good. And they just accept that at face value. I know from personal experience, and your guardrails really need to go up tenfold when you're dealing with foreign suppliers. And that's why I'm glad that they broke out FSVP separately and put the statute together separately around that, or not the statute, the regulations. But I had a supplier who was, we were looking at a supplier with a company I work with for a spice, and lots of microbiological risks with these spices. And they sent all kinds of pretty paperwork. And I'm like, okay, this is nice, but I want to talk to them. And you get these guys on the phone, and then you get the real scoop. And it's like, well, what are you guys doing about E. coli and treatment of this within the spice powders? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, what do you mean nothing? Well, that's your job. That's not our job. We just sell the spice. And now put on top of that, brokers and distributors and importers who have absolutely, in most cases, no understanding of food safety. It's a big problem. And
it's and not to interrupt, but I think that it does show everybody says it's the other guy's responsibility. I give you an example. Daily Harvest had a very strong contract with their supplier that essentially says, you're going to send me, high quality, non-adulterated food, and, blah, 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 blah. And if you don't, I get to, take your house. They have a contract that says that. And so they, even though they have a responsibility under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to not put an adulterated ingredient in their product, it's still their responsibility. Even though that they feel like they've contracted it away. And so they don't have to worry about it anymore because it's someone else's concern. And, and the supplier, gave a foreign supplier verification list of the things that they want to pay attention to. All of them were correct. And they just relied on the foreign manufacturer to provide them documents that, frankly, I don't think really anybody looked at very closely. And, they said, check box, I'm good. And they, when I deposed the Peruvian manufacturer, they were like, I don't even know what grass is.
Yeah.
I have no idea what any of this stuff. I relied on the supplier in the United States to tell me what's what. And you're like, so you've got this, you got this ingredient coming in. You're just like, nobody's in charge. Nobody's in charge.
Yeah.
It's not me, it's somebody else. And look what happened, and, 50 people lost their gallbladders over this. And,
Yeah.
there was, tens of millions of dollars in medical expenses. It's like, it's crazy. It's crazy. But all for a few hundreds of thousands of dollars of, probably not even that, of Terra imported, and, a couple $1,000,000 of sales of food. And it's like, it wasn't worth it.
No, absolutely not. So
So
here's a question from Larry. Let's pop this up here for you, Bill. What about the people impact side of the law? Whistleblowers, employees' frustration with employees not following food safety laws.
yeah, I mean, I get a lot of whistleblower calls. I mean, it's, I remember, and you've probably heard me tell the story in the Odwalla E. coli case. I remember coming into this was 1996. I remember coming into my office on a Saturday, and there was my message light on my phone was beeping. I answering my, and it was like, make sure you get the U.S. Army documents regarding Odwalla. Click. And what it was, Odwalla had tried to sell their juice to the U.S. Army. The Army came out, did a thorough inspection of their facility and said your juice was not fit for military consumers. But yet Odwalla kept shipping it to, pregnant women and little kids. So, the whistleblowers do come forward. And, even in this Daily Harvest case, we learned that, there were employees at Daily Harvest who were guinea pigs of testing the food product. And then people were getting sick. But because they weren't testing positive for hepatitis or E. coli or salmonella, people were just like, oh, well, it probably was something else. And there wasn't enough employees getting sick, arguably, that would have made them go, oh, let's not put this thing on the market. And so, we've had whistleblowers come forward with that kind of information. But, it's pretty clear that, we've seen whistleblowers, in the PCA case and others come forward over time. So, yeah, it happens.
Interesting. It kind of comes back to that extreme pressure side of things. So just to kind of set the frame around this so that everybody's on the same page here, within companies, product development and design, those time frames that are set are often not based on any of this. It's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to be selling our products into these retailers, and retailers have reset dates. And okay, this major retailer resets their shelves and looks at new products in September. And then the time schedule gets built back from that.
Right.
And they say, okay, well, we can find the ingredient. We'll buy this, we'll do that. And we'll launch the marketing on this date. And all of these mechanisms were put in place. And to the point that was made earlier, I think it was Larry here, the food safety guys a lot of times are way down in the process. And my point has always been, include us at the front, because cut your losses, right? If I'm going to be saying no after we spend $100,000 on development,
it's harder to say no then. Yeah. Well, it also makes it harder to say no, I mean, it's pretty clear that in this Daily Harvest thing, they got pitched this product, and within a day they turned around and pitched it to Daily Harvest. Daily Harvest didn't bite for several more months. And they didn't, until they had someone on the hook, Daily Harvest on the hook, the supplier didn't even start engaging their food safety people at all. And so, but once they had Daily Harvest on the hook, then they flopped out their foreign supplier verification checklist and said, fill these blanks in. And by then the pressure was, we're going to use this product. We got to do it by such and such a date, blah, blah, blah. I mean,
Well,
it's
and then once that once that supplier gets those first few sales, guess what? Now their salespeople are going out and saying, "Oh, hey, guess what? Your
Yeah.
competitors are buying from us. You should be buying now too," and it
Yeah.
just starts growing. My next comment here gets into what Felix is talking about here, right? There's compliance with the law and filling in the blanks, and then there's the ethical side of what we do.
Right. Right.
And one of the rules I always put in place for food companies that I work with and companies I've been in the past is R&D products. Is if you're producing something for R&D work and you're using it in a pilot plant or things like this, and you're producing on a small scale so you can see how it works, that is never allowed to be sent out for consumer testing, right? You can't make a trial product and send it out for evaluation. If the consumers are eating it and drinking it, that's real food, right?
Yep.
You can't do that. And that's on one of those rules that companies are always saying, well, can't we just no, you can't. This needs to follow all the rules of food because you're selling it to the public. And then they're like, oh yeah. So a lot of times they're not even thinking this through. And that's where what we do in food safety becomes really, really important. Is we have to be the group that's saying, hey guys, we need to do some thinking here first. To your point, GRAS, do companies, in most cases, I've been through GRAS submissions with FDA. Do most companies know how this mechanism works? No, they don't. Even in big food companies, the knowledge around this is pretty limited. Now imagine a small company.
Yep.
No. And you want to go to the CEO of the company and say, hey, boss, I think we should start spending, $100,000 on an evaluation of this ingredient that may or may not be acceptable for use. They're going to look at you like you're crazy.
Right. But the alternative is you're not going to be in. The alternative is you should not use it legally. Mm-hmm. So yeah, and my fear too is that ultimately, even if the CEO of a company doesn't really just give that sign off saying, well, I know it's not GRAS, but go ahead and use it anyway. And they just, there's their sales team and their QA people, and they say, hey, everything's fine. It's still that CEO's head on the chopping block, under the Park Doctrine, that they are ultimately responsible. But, also, the QA person is responsible. Those are, and although used very infrequently, the criminal sanctions under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act have been in the statute since the 30s. Mm-hmm. They're not used very often, but, they can be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And around this, so I think this is a perfect example today of what we're talking about. Is if you're going to be successful in food safety and quality assurance and controlling these hazards, you got to get out of your bubble. So a big chunk of this is explaining in the organization outside of quality in terms that they understand why these things are important. And if you're the head of quality in a company, you need to be explaining this information to the CEO and talking about the Park Doctrine. And that's one of the things when I work with companies, I'll ask them that. I'm like, do you know what the Park Doctrine is? And they're like, what, like for mowing the lawn in the parks and stuff? No. Let me tell you what the Park Doctrine is. And oh, by the way, that guy that's sitting in jail for PCA and all these type of things. Oh, and the quality manager went to jail as well because she went along with it. I'm just following orders. Doesn't work. And explaining this within the organization. A good way to do this is always kind of setting up what I kind of refer to as tiers of risk. And that's really what we're talking about here today. Known trusted supplier, you've been buying for years. It's from the same plant. Okay, great. I'm going to be doing a little bit of effort to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. But as we know in the food industry, you have to pick your battles because we have limited resources just like FDA. So you have this list of, hey, Brian, I want to look at a new ingredient. Okay, mine goes up a little bit. Where's it from? It's from the Middle East. Okay, what is it? It's a ground spice. It just keeps going up.
Right.
And it's like, okay, guys, this is high risk. These are the types of things that we need to do. This is the testing that needs to take place. I want the documentation. I may need to send somebody there, right? And you start putting all these things in place, and then you get a taste for the organization of whether or not they're willing to go through this work because it may not be worth the effort to do this, and that's fine. But you can't do it without that.
Right.
And you need to understand that risk assessment associated with this.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So one of those big hazards around this is doing a hazard analysis on the unknown. And this kind of gets into, so in Europe, they're really big on this, and it's not so much here in the US. And I've been critical of this, the precautionary principle. It really protects companies in this particular instance. If you're using precautionary principle as a broad type of process and philosophical outlook on how your companies are running things, that's going to grind you in the opposite direction. But if you assume that the materials have some type of risk and you haven't identified it yet and you're going to go and find it, or if you can't do that risk, you're not going to take it, that's a valid application in this particular scenario.
Yep. No, I agree. It's you know, I mean, I recognize that producing food is a tough business, you know, and I get it. And, you know, and I see the bad outcomes, you know, but, you know, also there's every day there are professionals, many of whom are probably listening to your show. There's professionals who, you know, are learning, they're doing the right thing. They're trying to figure out how to engage the CEO. You know, I was just finished reading a manuscript by a food safety professional, Nuno Soares from Portugal. Great guy. And I just finished reading a book an online book he's going to publish. And he had some really interesting ideas about, you know, trying to frame the discussion of food safety and make the CEO the hero of the play. And, you know, and I think, you know, you know, I have a tendency to be the guy that shows up with the bat afterwards and go, bad, bad, bad. And, you know, I think for a food safety professional, you don't want to be in that. You don't want to be the next door neighbor, you know. Yeah. And I really did think that Nuno had a really interesting idea, is because there's one thing that leaders have: large egos. And, you know, if you scratch that itch for them and make them understand that, you know, this example of the TerraFlower thing, you know, this cost the CEO her job.
Yeah.
You know, and so she's no longer the CEO of Daily Harvest. And, you know, and so there's just no question that, you know, an example like this and a real simple solution, it's like, if you want to use an ingredient, make sure that it's been approved, period. And if it hasn't been approved, come up with a different idea, you know, or engage in what you need to do to get it approved. It's highly likely that had anybody done anything, they could have had this product approved. It probably could have been approved. Unfortunately, the outcome would have still been the same, but that just shows you what obviously it's complex.
Right. And so part of the way I always communicate to CEOs, and number one, right? So is that CEO at Daily Harvest, the ex-CEO, is she going to be able to find another CEO job? Probably not.
Yeah, she probably made enough money where it's not an issue. They were, you know, when the stock, you know, went up, she profited. But the bottom line is that, yeah, it's not like she, you know, it's not like, yeah. I mean, I've talked to many post employees who have not been able to find jobs after they left Daily Harvest because, you know, they go, oh, you worked at Daily Harvest. Yeah. So, yeah. So.
Yeah, you don't want that hanging around your neck. Right. So the way I try and present this to CEOs when I'm talking about this with them is part of their job, and they understand this, because always remember, CEOs in almost all cases, very rarely, but in most cases, CEOs do not come from food safety. They come from marketing, sales, finance, maybe. They may not even come from the food industry. They may bring in a CEO from automotive, for all you know, and they have absolutely zero knowledge. But what they do understand is the key part of their role is protecting the brand so the company can grow, and protecting the consumers so that they'll come back and buy more product. Well, guess
Right.
what? That's why I'm here, is to
Right.
help you do that.
Exactly.
And you have to put it in these terms for them so that they understand it. Yeah, if you go into meetings with the CEO talking about E. coli and bringing up,
Right.
no, you're going to lose them. Put it in terms that they understand, and that's one of those key traits and one of those leadership capabilities that if you want to move up and be successful in food safety and quality assurance, you have to master these skill sets. It's much more than what we do in the technical side. We have to be able to translate the technical into terms that people outside of this can understand. And getting back to our example here today with the TerraFlower, is putting it in those terms that the organization understands. Are we willing to take this risk? And if you present it correctly, it should be no, we don't want to take that risk. And being able to present it in such a way that they understand these attributes. In a lot of different ways, Bill, one of the things I always preach here on the chat as well is, in a lot of ways, the food safety group in the company is the conscience of the organization. We're the moral group. We're the ones saying right, wrong, good, bad, pass, fail. And we have to help the organization understand the why behind those rules, just not dictating those things. To your point earlier, right? This thing doesn't work. Never works.
Yeah. No, that's very wise.
So, I mean, really around this, and as we look at this, getting back to the regulatory side of things, this is why food safety verification for foreign suppliers is so important. And not taking that documentation at face value.
Right.
Okay, fine, you got a COA. Who cares? When did they perform the test? What was the lot size? What testing methodologies did they use? Did they pull a sample from one bag, or did they get a representative sample across all of that lot? How often do they test? All of this information is super important. And this is where I think companies, and I'll call them out here by name because I think they do a great job, is Nestle. Nestle has a tiered supplier program where if you're a brand new supplier and they don't know you, number one, you got to get through all the hurdles to get in as a supplier. Then they do a very high rate of sampling and acceptance at their manufacturing locations to make sure that what you're getting is what they said you're going to get. And over time, as you show your worth as a supplier, they'll drop down to a low level. But if you screw up, guess what? Whoop, you're back up to that top tier again. And it's a really good way to help monitor and allocate those resources within that company to make sure that things are being managed correctly.
Yep, absolutely.
And the other big piece of this as well, and I think companies gloss over this way, way too much, because I see this all the time in food safety programs, Bill, is who is your intended customer? And it'll say general population. And I'm like, really? And there have been plenty of times where I've been working with companies that are selling to children. Guess what? It's not general population. You are selling to children.
Right.
If your company, if the sales group has decided, hey, you know what? We've got a great opportunity here to start selling our products through food service to schools or hospitals or nursing homes.
Right.
You're now in that category. We've all seen it, even in industries where you think you would have the highest levels of safety, infant formula. Well, it's kind of coming out now that things weren't exactly going the way they should have.
Yep.
So
no, I saw that in and it's something I hadn't really thought about, but I was involved in the listeria outbreak in South Africa. That Poloni in 2018. Sickened over 1,000, killed 200. And one of the things that I didn't, sort of really kind of grasp until I started reviewing all these medical records is just how much of the population was immune compromised because of HIV. And so, it's like putting a listeria contaminated product into the marketplace in that environment. It was like, this kind of thing was bound to happen, and I take your point that, if especially you're marketing things to kids or grandmas or, whomever, you're going to have to pay a little bit even more attention to the system than normal.
Yeah. We had a fascinating chat here a few months ago with Campbell Mitchell, who was brought in the aftermath to help them recover. And during that chat, one of the things, Bill, he was talking about was Tiger Brands is, yeah, they sell food, but they're a massive conglomerate that makes all kinds of stuff. So if you're looking at food the same as you look at automobile parts, you're hosed, right? You're not going to get that attention that you need.
I agree completely.
So part of this is really, we've been just covering a ton of material here today, is how do companies protect their brand and public health? And around this is, and someone in the chat earlier had mentioned this, is make sure in your company, and you need to start out early on this. And if you don't have a good program, regardless of the size of your company, you need to have this. You need to have a good stage gate process in place for product development and changes. And then you can insert yourself into that process from this food safety standpoint and use that as that platform to make sure the organization understands it. There's this giant funnel of ideas. Every company has all these ideas. You can't do them all. So you have to have a methodology of whittling this stuff down. And guess what? This example that we're talking about with the TerraFlower is textbook. Use this as an example of what not to do in your processes, and use this to set up those stage gates to make sure that you're evaluating all these elements, because it's just not, okay, what's our profit margin? What's our cost per unit on this? Are we going to make money? And how fast can we launch this? Yeah, those are important. But if it kills or causes your consumers to lose their gallbladders, ain't worth it, right? So you need to figure these things out very, very quickly. And keep an eye on the market. We're constantly seeing, if you're not using this information, and you do a great job, Bill, with the food safety news, and I read that every day, is you have to be ahead of these trends so that you can inform the organization what the heck is going on in the marketplace. What are those risks? What are the new things that we're seeing out there? These things change all the time. We have all of these new platforms for product that are being produced. We have plant-based all over the, plant-based meat, you name it, plant-based, all kinds of, okay, great. What are the new risks associated with that? Right? Okay, fine. We'll look at the risks from a microbiological standpoint. Anything from a plant-based type product that's close proximity to the soil, should you be worried about Bacillus cereus? Absolutely. But what about everything else? What about the pesticides? What about heavy metal contamination? All these other elements you need to be looking at as well. And as you pointed out very well in Poisoned, is if you have a feedlot next to a produce farm, it's a big problem. Huge problem.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So with that, we'll kind of bring this back up to the 30,000 foot level here, Bill. Any closing thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with today?
No, I mean, I think we covered, I think this is a good, this Terra thing is a good example. It's, and even if what it does is make people go, wait a second, this is a new product, I'm going to find out whether or not it's been approved before. Is it grass? And if the answer is yes, it's still, you still have to worry about all the other things you have to worry about, COAs and, supply chain and all that. You still have to worry about that. But to me, it's like, boy, if you could pay attention, this is a new ingredient, bing, bing, bing. I'm going to at least find out, is it approved? And if the answer is no, then that's a step back. Doesn't mean that sometime down the road, you might not want to be able to use that, but you're going to have to figure out a way to jump through some hoops that you don't necessarily have to pay for. I mean, frankly, the onus of finding out whether or not a product is safe or, to be able to sell really should fall on the manufacturer, to determine that it's whether, or, to get a determination of grass or not. And, and so once they have that, and once it shows up on the FDA's website, or, there's a clear document that shows they got grass status, you still have to worry about pathogens or heavy metals and all that stuff, but at least you can kind of get this one out of the way. And I think hopefully that this is a cautionary tale that, at least as it relates to, new and novel ingredients, that you pay attention to, because, the outcome isn't super pleasant.
No. So two closing thoughts for me is you don't have to be an expert in everything. but you
Right.
have to know the people who are experts. So if you start having questions around grass, figure it out. There are lawyers out there that specialize in this stuff. Who are they? Find out. And the other piece of that then is communicate, right? You need to have this information out in the company and make sure that they understand these risks. Keep up to date on this stuff. So, wow, fantastic, Bill. I love having you on the chat. This is always an amazing chat. And thank you to everybody. Wow, we were lighting it up here with comments here today. Thank you, everybody, for all these wonderful comments. Bill also provided some really good background information on this as well that I'm going to post in our database as well. And of course, don't forget the locals database. This is a database where I keep track of what's going on in the food industry, and I post 2 or 3 times a week. And frankly, a lot of it comes from you, Bill, from the Food Safety News. And put that in there so that people are aware of those different things. But that's just my perspective on what I think is important. That doesn't really matter. It's your perspective as the person responsible for food safety. You need to keep track of these things. So with that, guys, thanks for the participation. Thank you, Bill. Fantastic chat here today. We'll bring it to a close. And of course, we will be back here next week at the same time on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern for the next chat. And I'll have another amazing guest on like Bill. So in the meantime, enjoy your weekend. Have a great time. It's a long weekend, hopefully for everybody. Relax a little bit. And we'll take it all again up next week. So have a great one. Thanks again, Bill.
Thanks a lot, Brian. We'll see you again. Thank you.